Hey everybody, as always, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Brothers Trek About. Just a quick intro here to fill you in on a couple things about this episode. First of all, when Ken and I started out doing this show, we really wanted to do Star Trek. We wanted to hit the original series, and then when Discovery came about, do Discovery, which we have been doing, and I hope you've been enjoying the episodes. But we also wanted to make it Trek About : so that we could hit other fun subjects, maybe someday hit Hamilton, or maybe, do whatever fun movies might be coming out. So, of course, me being a big Star Wars fan, why would I not want to review the Star Wars movie? So that's what you're about to hear right here, right now. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Also, on a stupid technical note, for some reason, a lot of my audio got glitched in this episode. I don't know what happened. So sometimes you're going to hear the glitched audio. Sometimes you're going to hear re-recorded audio. I apologize for all of it. Enjoy the episode, and may the Force be with you. Oh, he went there. Welcome back to the Big Show. As always, my name is Matt, coming to you from Austin, and coming to us is my brother Ken. Say hello, Ken.
May the Force be with you.
That's right. We are the Brothers Trek About, but this week we're not going to be trekking about. We're going to be forcing our way about, as we'll be discussing The Last Jedi. Because, wow, the hate out there has been incredible, folks. And as a self-professed Star Wars fan, as I've said from the beginning, I cannot believe it. I was amazed. Like, I came out of this movie like, wow, that was heavy. I felt like it was a lot to unpack. I couldn't wait to go see it again after I had seen it. But, like, I got home and went online and was amazed by the amount of people coming out going, I don't think I liked it, or people just vehemently saying, that sucked. So we're going to break it down some more. I will warn you right at the beginning that both Ken and I liked it. So there's not going to be a lot of counterpoint on our own part, but I think we will be breaking down and talking about some of the stuff we have been reading online and why people hate it. It's crazy.
I think it's a question, right? So why is it that people don't like not only this movie or the last movie or the prequels or what have you, but since this is the Brothers Trek About, we can analogize a little bit to why franchises that get to live a long life, like some of the reviews that we saw about Discovery, or maybe the lack of enthusiasm around Enterprise, or how some of the movies haven't fared well, or other long franchises. Obviously, James Bond has had its high points and low points.
Right.
And so, looking at this specific example of this other space franchise, maybe we can get some insight into the difficulty in a franchise that tries to live long and prosper.
Right. Well, you were making a good point when we were talking before the show started about how, like, if this were any other movie, that it would not be dealing with the hate that it's dealing with.
That's right. It seems like, people love a franchise. They're invested, and if it was just some movie that, you'd never heard of, space movie, and you didn't know anything about it or who wrote it or what it's about, and you went to see it and you didn't like it, you'd just be like, whatever. You wouldn't feel the need to hate it. You'd just be like, yeah, didn't buy it. And if you really love something and consequentially you have expectations, there are things you think ought to happen or going to happen, that the characters work this way and they're going to behave this way in the future, and the writers and director and the creatives go a different direction, then you have some disappointment. And you can do two things with that. You can say, oh, I was surprised. That's what movies are supposed to do. Or you can feel let down and disappointed, and of course, to paraphrase Yoda, disappointment leads to anger, anger leads to hate. Hate is the path to the dark side.
Right, exactly. Well, it's funny because a lot of what I have been reading online from people who didn't like the movie are saying it wasn't about the expectations. Well, I don't know. There might be two different camps. There's might be camps who just went in thinking like, this is not my Luke Skywalker. You know what I mean? That I wanted Luke to come out at the end of the movie. I wanted him to smash every one of those AT-RTs or whatever they were, the AT-ATs, into pieces. I wanted them to have the greatest lightsaber battle ever against Kylo Ren, which of course is not what they did.
Right. And even Mark Hamill said, this is not my Luke Skywalker.
Right. Well, yes, he said that. I think that he changed his mind about it, but I think that, yes, he went in thinking that, definitely.
Well, and I think that in a lot of ways, this isn't, draw a line from A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back to and then just continue that line on infinitely, as though nothing ever happened to Luke to change his trajectory or to, make him sad or disappointed or, do anything different.
Yeah.
But of course, that's not how reality works. And just having those expectations is kind of bizarre. Like, this is going to be the exact same person plus some number of years that he was from the last time we saw him. So, for example, taking the character of Kirk, the way he was at the beginning of the motion picture and the way he was at the beginning of Wrath of Khan, he was not the same Kirk that we had left. Those directors, and they talk about it a lot in the Wrath of Khan, is they wanted to create, problems for Kirk to overcome, that he wanted his command back, that he was concerned about aging, that things had changed. He wasn't the same person, and now he had new things to wrestle with in his different position. And it only makes sense that Luke would be a different person with different problems, and the question has to be, is this something that plausibly could have happened, even with a lot of bad things, a lot of, trauma, a lot of loss, a lot of grief? Could he end up here? And I think the answer is totally yes. This is a place he could have ended up. It's not ridiculous in the sense that, like, he gave up the Force and became a smuggler and, is like... You're like, no, he became
Han Solo. He's a pirate out there.
Yeah, he's a pirate. He's not just a smuggler, he's a pirate.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, and it's not like he turned to the dark side either, you know what I mean? He just got rid of it all because he just felt he wasn't the one to carry on the dogma of the Jedi, basically.
Well, the legacy had... And, of course, he knew the guys who were the real last ones, who were brought up in the system, who had, sat in the council, who had... we see how Obi-Wan had been such a big deal, and, of course, Yoda had been a big deal for 900 years.
Yeah.
So it all that weight is on Luke, who didn't grow up in that and have, at the very least, the kind of, well-developed foundations upon which to carry some of that weight. And, of course, things went badly. So there was temptation, and Ben Solo apparently was, a little too dark side. And you can imagine how would Luke be prepared to deal with that? I mean, it was difficult enough for Obi-Wan, who had all of the background teachings of all the Jedi lore, and who could have, at any moment gone to any one of the other Jedi Masters and say, "Hey, I got a problem. This is what I'm wrestling with. My apprentice is X, Y, and Z."
Well, plus the dark side was clouding everything, as we know as well. So,
well, it certainly was in terms of how his apprentice was being seduced.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so one of the funniest memes I've seen that's come out of this is, the idea of, like, Luke running away, because that's what everybody feels like. He's not standing up and fighting. But then you look at Obi-Wan, that's what he did. He went to go and hide and cover. And that's what Yoda did. Like, he was there waiting for Luke or Leia, whichever one was going to become the next Jedi. So it's like there is... And not only that, and this is the most amazing part of it, is that this was George Lucas's plan. Like... His original plan for Episode 7 was that Luke had, disappeared. Nobody knew where he was or what he was doing. And in his original, Episode 7 idea was that he was going to have, 2 younger kids who were strong in the Force go hunt down and try and find Luke because nobody knows what happened to him. So, I mean, it was the same thing. It was the same idea. So if you're yelling at Rian Johnson, you should be yelling at at George Lucas, because even though they didn't use all of his ideas for this sequel trilogy, they used that idea. They stole, they totally stole that. The girl who was supposed to be part of that was named Kira, who was then Kira for a while until they changed her name at the last minute for Force Awakens, and she became Rey. So there's a lot of these like building blocks of the sequel trilogy that all came from George Lucas anyway. So again, everyone's going out and blaming, yelling at Rian Johnson, and yet that's not where this even started.
And if we go back even a step further, back before Lucas, to Campbell and the Myth of a Thousand Faces, kind of idea, this reluctance for the hero to take the action, the hero who resists the adventure, that's a core part. And it's not uncommon in these stories for, at some point, our hero to refuse the call.
Yeah.
And of course, Luke did it very briefly. Oh, I've got responsibilities, people depend on me, I can't run off on your mission. Well, we must do what you must, of course. But in this case, it's not like Luke doesn't have an aunt and uncle who are depending on him or responsibilities around the house. He can say no. Nope.
Yep.
And unlike the young Luke, who's kind of dazzled by this guy who knew his father and, has all these other cool things and a light sword and everything else. Rey's bringing nothing new. She just has the call to action.
Right.
There's no princess. And even when R2 shows the princess, he's like, ooh, dirty trick.
Yeah. Dirty trick.
Underhanded. Yeah. So, if you're familiar with the kinds of mythologies that Lucas was working with and drawing upon when he created the stories in the beginning, those are still playing out here.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, the story is true to the original source material.
Well, this is the other thing I was trying to say earlier, is that it's also, too, in that talk he has with Yoda, right? Saying that Luke, always looking to the horizon, never in the here and now. He says that in Empire. He says that again here. You know what I mean? So it's Luke looking at, like, this legacy, as you were saying, of the Jedi and just being overwhelmed by it and going like, I don't even know how to go on. I made my misstep. I don't think that I can come back from that misstep. And so then, and this is the part that, like, to me, shuts all the naysayers down, is that then he does go to action. You know what I mean? He force projects himself.
Yeah.
He makes himself he goes out there and does the most amazing force move. It's what's so elegant about it, He like goes out there and does the most amazing force move that anyone's ever seen by astral projecting himself there, living time for, Rey and the rest to escape. Also creating the next generation of Jedi.
Yeah.
And his own legend.
So I think, connected to this idea of that you're a fan of a franchise, so you love it, and therefore are susceptible to disappointment, I think fans are also susceptible to, kind of projecting out what they think the characters are going to do. They think they know these characters. They think they own the characters. And they want the characters to do what they want them to do. Not necessarily what would make for good stories. In a sense, they all become Mary Sue's, where everything is amazing for them.
Yeah.
They're successful in life. They're successful in love. They defeat their enemies. They establish a glorious new future. And everybody's happy and it all works out great. But, of course, you can't make drama around that.
Right.
Drama has to be built around things like conflict and failure, and we still have obstacles. And those obstacles, can't always be like, say for Alexander, well, I've conquered Persia, and then I went to India, and, maybe I'll go west and conquer Italy.
Right.
Sometimes it's going to be, well, the thing I thought I was doing didn't work out the way I thought it would, and I had obstacles, and I didn't necessarily have the preparation to deal with those problems, which I think is what happens a lot to Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Both because he's eyeing the horizon, bearing this huge burden of the Jedi, but he also doesn't have the network. He doesn't have the other Jedi to help him, or to step up where he falls and go, here, let me help you out with that. Let me give you some advice. I mean, you see scenes in the prequels in which Obi-Wan is talking with Mace Windu or Yoda about his apprentice and the problems of his apprentice.
Yeah.
And of course, Luke has, unless he's talking to Force ghosts, he doesn't have anybody to talk to. He's got to deal with this on his own. And he does have this flaw, this looking to the horizon. He's not, living each day, for itself.
Yeah.
So then when you expand that to fans, and the way that fans will, kind of project stuff, it's hard to tell new stories. That's an inevitable obstacle. So, for example, we saw with Discovery, the creators there felt like they needed to rework the Klingons a little bit. You saw people objecting about how the technology looks, as though you could go back to the 1960s and do anything like that.
But why would you want to?
You had people objecting. Yeah. You had people objecting to the fact that now the focus wasn't on a captain, but on a different officer. Lots of complaints, and, good storytelling doesn't necessarily have to be about captains or use Klingons in the exact same way that they've always been depicted. Mythologies change and evolve, and different storytellers, attribute different qualities to heroes. So you're thinking, well, which Hercules are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
The Hercules of the anger and the wrath, or the Hercules of the great strength, or is he more a son of Zeus, or is he just strong man? Does he represent the Dorians, or maybe he represents some other cities or places or locales? The Italians had their own Hercules who did things in Italy.
Right.
And so, letting storytellers open up the story and reinterpret it and, talk about old things in new ways allows the story to live forever. But if this is the problem with canon, right?
Okay.
And so we see this when we're talking about the spore drive in Discovery. Well, we've never heard of the spore drive. Can't introduce something new like that. That's totally illegitimate. I don't like it.
Right.
Or we've never seen Vulcans do that before. Whether it's the long-range telepathy or various things. Therefore, it's illegitimate. I don't like it. I can't let the storytellers tell a good... I'm not going to evaluate it. Is this a good story? I got to go, no, it doesn't... It's not narrowly confined within canon. I heard people complaining about the fact that why have we never heard of Saru's species before? As though the galaxy is so small, we've met everyone.
Yeah.
There's nobody new out there. There are no new planets
Yeah.
for us to discover. No new civilizations.
Just to touch on a side note to that, I think that they, in my opinion, they're having the opposite problem in Star Wars, because since The Force Awakens comes out, we haven't seen any Greedos, any hammerheads, any of those like classic creatures, and it's because like the Disney wants to open up the universe and be like, look how many species. But like, why not just throw in a Greedo? In that whole cantina scene, you could have thrown in a hammerhead or any of a Bith, playing the music or whatever. It's like, why are we not showing these classic? Why are they nowhere to be seen now in the Star Wars galaxy all of a sudden?
Although we did see them in the movie in between Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, the war one, where they steal the plans.
Did we? I mean, yeah, we saw
well,
more
so we see
of the Mon Cal.
the two guys that Obi-Wan confronts in the
that's true.
cantina.
Yeah, those two.
They were on this other planet. We even have R2 and 3PO wandering around, doing stuff. We have, lots of callbacks in that movie. In ways that,
I guess that's
for
true.
example, other critics were saying, why was this here? Other than to be a callback.
Yeah.
It was unnecessary. Didn't need to be there. And you're like, yeah, but those familiar notes we enjoy those.
Yes, exactly.
So unless they're obstacles, they get in the way, they're distractions, then, if we're enjoying it, then, especially when they're short.
So, it's interesting. I'll probably hit on the prequels a couple of times throughout this conversation, but it's interesting because this feels like the prequels all over again. It was like, again, I know they have flaws, it doesn't mean I don't love the movies. You know what I mean? I love all three of those movies, and I would rate them 3, 1, 2, just in case anybody cares. I love Sith the most. I love Phantom Menace next, and I just feel like Attack of the Clones is kind of all over the place. But it has some great stuff in it as well. You know, I love the little mystery that, Obi-Wan gets to go on by himself, and the finding of the clones, and then of course, those last minutes of that movie with the Clone Wars actually happening and them fighting Dooku and all of that stuff is I think amazing. But it just feels like it's kind of all over the place. But that's what it feels like to me. I feel like this is, there are people who are out there defending it because they love Star Wars and because, like, whatever Star Wars is, it's better than no Star Wars,
Right, which is a perfectly reasonable argument.
Exactly. And not only that, but I also feel like that maybe us older generational people, when we went through all of this stuff with the prequels, right? The love them and hate them and blah, blah, blah. So you then go into the movie theater and you watch something that just blows you away. Like, I'm not going in, I don't know, I didn't go in expecting a lot. I'm not saying I'm not expecting a lot out of this movie, but I had no expectations going into this movie. You know what I mean? Yeah, I kind of hoped I would have got to see, like I said, full power Luke going out there and just using his force powers to take on legions of stormtroopers. But again, I love the elegance of what they did. I thought that was really, like, perfect. So I don't know. Maybe it was just that and I don't mean jaded in a bad way, but it was just that, like, I'm going in expecting, a great Star Wars movie, and I felt like that's what I got. So, I don't know. That's
I think part of it is allowing the storyteller to tell their story.
Right.
Instead of insisting that the storyteller tell the story you want to see.
Yeah. Well, and so this will be a perfect segue into the Canto Bight stuff, right? The casino planet. Like, that's the part where everybody seems to be losing their mind. They're like, it was pointless. Why did they go there? Blah, blah, blah. But for me, and this is a point I made, like, after my second viewing of the movie, was like, that in any other movie is going to totally work out, right? They're going to be able to go onto the other ship. They're going to find the thing that they were looking for. They're going to be able to zoom the rest of the fleet away from the scary dreadnought, and then that's it, right? Yay, we have saved the day. But what's so incredible about this is that they totally subvert your expectations, like most of this movie did. And what they do instead is that it causes the death of more of the resistance, of almost all of the resistance, let's be honest. So I didn't hate that stuff. I love that stuff. Not only that, but it introduces, the kids at the end of the movie. We see them earlier. We see them again later in the movie talking about the legend of Luke Skywalker and essentially creating the next wave of resistance fighters and Jedi. Also Rose's line, when she goes to save Finn, by saying we're not going to beat them by killing the thing we hate, but by saving the thing that we love. Like, people are complaining about Rose or whatever, they didn't like her. I thought she was fine. But then people are complaining about the kiss that they have at the end, right? But I thought that kiss is perfect because it comes out of nowhere. It's like this perfectly, like, awkward girl who has this crush on a hero who then gets to go on an adventure with him. So at the end of it, she just wants to, like, kiss him. And yes, it might turn into something, it might not. We don't know. But, I mean, I thought, like, it was, like, it was just, like, the perfect little thing between the two of them. I don't know. I like that.
Yeah, so I think shipping is an example of where people let their expectations get in the way of their pleasure. Right? So, whether it's Buddhist or Stoic, there's this argument that expectations are the problem, right? That you should have no expectations. You should just go in and say, deliver to me some excellent entertainment, and I will be entertained. Instead of saying, no, these two characters have to fall in love. Not those characters. These characters have to have the happy thing. That guy's got to go away. He's in the way. He's a problem. And of course, in a sense, you're stuck with whatever the creators came up with. If they've got a new girlfriend for Finn in the third movie, that's going to happen. And shipping Rey or shipping Rose or shipping, Admiral Hodo or
Poe.
Yeah, Poe. Whoever you think really belongs with Finn is kind of a mistake. I mean, I don't mind having some preferences as long as you can go to the movie and say, I'm willing to experience what you guys have created.
Yep.
Instead of saying, well, if you didn't match the characters I need to be matched, then this movie sucks.
Well, before we continue the shipping talk, because obviously we need to get into Reylo here in a minute, but I was going to tell the story because it was connecting to something, and I don't know why I was connecting. But anyway, the first time I saw the movie, because it was what you were saying earlier, about just letting it wash over you, like, again, no expectations, super excited, can't wait, go into the movie theater, sit down, and, like, I was just blown away. Like for 2 hours, you know what, or 2.5 hours, as long as it is. Like I remember, like it was just like a wash over me. It was like hitting me with like just tide after tide after tide. You know what I mean? So that when we walked out of the movie, I mean, I remembered the plot points, but I just was like, what I saw. I don't even know like how I can put any of this into context. And I knew I was going to see it again the next day. Like we already had both Jamie and I had tickets to go see it the next day. So we did. But, it was, and I couldn't wait. I was like, yeah, let's go do it. I had 2 friends of mine who, without telling me, left the movie theater, got on their phones, bought tickets for another theater, 10 minutes away, and went and saw it again that night. Because they were just like, literally just, again, what did I see? That was amazing. And more to that, it's amazing to me how many people I've seen online say, you know what? I went and saw it again. And the things that bothered me the first time bothered me less this time. Which, again, I think has a lot to do with expectations. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, now my expectations are gone. I know that they're not the things that happened. So now show me again. Let me now experience again what did happen. And then a lot of people on their second times are definitely, enjoying it more. Not everybody, but most people are. So, yeah, I guess it's time to talk about Reylo here. I knew that was a ship that was happening after The Force Awakens. I did not see that. I didn't feel like that was the way they were going to go with it. I thought that they had other plans for both of the characters. But now that it's happened, it was really interesting in the movie, right? You got them, force timing with each other. I mean, look, I didn't expect there to be a romantic relationship between the two. He's kind of an abusive boyfriend in the first movie, right? He's like totally trying to be invasive into her head in the interrogation scene.
So, it's always nice
stops her and holds her still with the Force, admittedly, but still stops her from moving, in the scene in the forest. All the I want you to be a teacher. I mean, of course, this is the thing is that they're setting up in that movie, through JJ's mystery boxes, that they could be brother and sister, that they, that maybe it was Kylo who left her on the planet. Like there are, a million questions you have about what their relationship could possibly be. So in my head, I kept thinking that it was going to be brother and sister or cousin or some such thing. So it isn't until after this movie comes out that I find out that when they were talking or when they were auditioning actors to be Kylo, that they were auditioning with stuff from Pride and Prejudice. I don't know if that's true. That could just be all fake. But so much of that comes out in this movie, and it, is amazing. So there's so much about the Kylo and Rey stuff that I liked.
I'm going to go back to Star Trek. To have, let's say, Khan and Kirk talking to one another throughout the movie. Of course, those guys never actually have a scene together. They're always, as you put it, force timing.
Yeah.
And so, but that's some good stuff. Having those characters interact with each other, talk to each other. And so these characters who, we're not exactly sure where Rey stands. The movies from the beginning have always done a good job of, making you wonder a little bit whether or not the good character might be turned to the bad side. I don't think we notice it necessarily when we're watching New Hope to Return of the Jedi.
Uh-huh.
But of course, when we rewatched, with my granddaughters, we watched them in numerical order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In part because the beginning of New Hope with the droids wandering through the desert, that was just too slow for little kids to get into.
Right.
And of course, Episode 4 has a little kid in it, who they found it easier to identify with.
Yippee!
So it was just easier for us to watch. I tried 4 twice, and they couldn't get through, or the older one couldn't get through the desert scene. when you watch 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, in 4, 5, 6, there's a lot of foreshadowing that Luke might be turned.
Yeah, yeah.
Having already watched Anakin fall, Gypsy, the older one, she was deeply concerned that Luke was going to go down the same path.
Oh, no.
She was very upset.
Wow.
In the final confrontation.
Huh.
Because she thought, oh, I've invested in this second character. Now, of course, for her, it was so, happy when Anakin gets redeemed. Because she had liked Anakin so much the
Perfect
first
ending.
time. And now she had liked Luke. And so, in a sense, both characters are saved and become good again. In a way that they don't necessarily if you watch it the first time. One, because you don't feel as much that Luke is at risk, and you haven't invested as much in Anakin as a good guy as opposed to as a cool guy.
Well, it's funny because as I've told you before, my experiment with that same thing of taking somebody through 1, 2, 3, right? We watched 1 and 2, and then we went to go see Revenge of the Sith in the movie theater, and she ended up bawling. Like, just straight up, like, crying because she was like, I thought that they were going to, like, be together and they were going to, like, live in a castle somewhere. And you're like, oh, yeah, no, that's not where this is going at all. So, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know Anakin's going to turn into Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And then you get to that point in the series, that's the biggest shocker of them all. So good.
In a lot of ways, that's good drama.
Yeah.
So, if we use the Shakespearean description, right, a comedy is funny, happy, ends in a marriage.
Yeah.
And a tragedy ends with everybody dead.
Yeah.
And, I don't necessarily think that Star Wars is a comedy.
Uh-huh.
It's just, it doesn't have enough comedic elements. It's not that funny. It doesn't seem like the kind of movie where everybody ends up happy and living in a castle and... now, if you don't know what you're watching, you could think, well, it's gonna end up being a comedy,
right?
It's gonna end up with a marriage, right? And if any trilogy kind of led you that way, that was probably the one that you thought, yeah, they're gonna end up in a castle.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's a tragedy.
Yep.
Everyone dies at the end. I mean, literally everybody dies at the end.
Yeah.
You got like 4 characters who escape.
Exactly. Well, since you mentioned comedy, what was your take on the comedy in The Last Jedi?
So,
because there's a lot of people who felt like it was too modern or something.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of criticism I think is goofy. A movie has to exist in its time period. You can't say, well, the joke should have felt like the 70s. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get someone who's going to, like, steep themselves in a particular era's worth of humor to write the movie? Well, then nobody watching the movie today is going to get the jokes except for old people. That doesn't make any sense.
True.
You have to make it contemporary in terms of the humor. But I think that in a movie like in a tragedy, the purpose of humor is to lighten the tension a little bit. Because otherwise it can get a little bit relentless. You don't want every play to be... Macbeth. So, even if it's going to end up, down, you kind of want Guildenstern and, the other guy.
Rosencrantz.
That guy, yeah. You want those 2 characters. You want some characters who are going to be funny because Hamlet ends up with everybody dead. And so, lightening the tension along the way makes that experience enjoyable, as opposed to depressing. And that's what I expect, comedy to be in a show like this, which is, I think, ultimately a tragedy, and full of all kinds of fighting and tension and drama.
Well, I think too, Rian Johnson uses it much like he does a lot of things in the movie to like subvert your expectations. Like you got that whole opening bit with, can I get General Hugs on the line, please? Capital H.
Yeah.
Tasty guy. General Hugs looking for... Well, look, I can't wait for him. He's so good. And then you also got Luke's line of, where are you from? I'm from nowhere. Nobody's from nowhere. I'm from Jakku. Okay, that's nowhere. That's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then he comes right back with the who are you, Rey from nowhere? I love that. But speaking back to Rey and some more Reylo stuff, it's so of course I watched the movie and I was like, okay, it's cool. I see what they're doing here. They're kind of setting up sort of a Romeo and Juliet thing, maybe,
Yeah.
which they also subvert in a way by, then at the end of, because you could almost think, okay, this is going to be Return of the Jedi again, right? We're going to have the light side coming in, save the dark side, and you're like, oh no, that's not what they're doing at all, Kylo then decides, he's going to stay with the First Order and even goes so far as to do the Vader thing where he reaches out his hand and asks Rey to rule with him, which of course she's like, don't do this. Please don't do this. Which I think is great because it perfectly sets up the next episode, right? Episode 9.
Right, yeah.
The board has been cleared. So it's got to be just the Rey and Kylo story, and that's it. There's nothing else left over to fight about. It's the Resistance. I mean, obviously it's the Resistance and the First Order, but it's also Rey and Kylo, and that's it. The board has been cleared. There's no more Phasma. There's no more, a Snoke specifically. There's nothing else, for the story to deal with except for these two and good versus evil, basically.
And a lot of the forces that the First Order has, large armies and so forth, are kind of irrelevant if you're tracing down, a few extraordinary people.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because that's another complaint that I've heard, which it kind of even started in The Force Awakens, where, you only sort of know that when Starkiller Base blows up the Hosnian system, that they've taken care of the Senate and the fleet as well. So it's not depicted. It's kind of a shame that they didn't do a little more of the backstory. I'm not saying in the galaxy as a macro view, so we can sort of really either feel the loss of the Republic and also feel the strength of the First Order. At the beginning of the Last Jedi, it seems like the First Order is like in charge again. It's 30 seconds after the other movie ended, but yeah, now it's suddenly like the First Order is large and in charge. Also, in regards to Reylo, is that it was funny because Jamie, as soon as we got out of it, Jamie was like, wow, that was some of that stuff between Rey and Kylo was pretty hot. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, it was kind of steamy. And I was like, I didn't see that at all.
Right.
I mean, I understand what happened in the story. I understand that there's a love connection happening there, but I did not see, hot, steamy romance coming at it. And so she totally was like, no, you gotta be, and we were talking to my boss about it. And my boss was like, I didn't see it either. I don't know if it's just that I don't associate sex with Star Wars. It never seems like anybody has sex in Star Wars. We had a virgin birth for Anakin, for gosh sake. So it's like, there's no love to be had, or there's no sex to be had in the Star Wars universe. But yeah, Jamie, in fact, surprisingly, Jamie has even seen it one more time than I have. So that's also interesting. So let's get to your idea that Disney is reinterpreting the Force.
Okay, so, you go back and listen to the old George Lucas talking about stuff, and, his description that, when people embrace good values like charity and mercy and kindness, you get this one kind of thing, and that's the Jedi, and then people who embrace these darker, hate, anger, Yoda lists them off to us, right?
Right.
But he included things like greed, all the bad stuff. Basically, you have the 7 deadly sins and the 7 cardinal virtues, right. And I think his idea was much more that there was a good side and a dark side and a hero, and there was a more stark Manichaean view of the world with Lucas, especially early on, which is to say the original trilogy. And I still think it's at work in the prequels, although I do think it's not as clear. And now I feel like Disney has made it clear in lots of their materials, which is to say not just these movies, but the way things have played out in Rebels and some other stuff, that the Force is really, as they are describing it here in Last Jedi, it's just a thing. It's just out there, and there's no really good side and or light side and dark side. The Force just is, and then, in a sense, it was a mistake for the Jedi to focus only on the light because they became kind of disconnected to the whole of the Force, and that was part of their mistake. And the Sith equally make that mistake by focusing only on the dark, and that a proper Force user would have a balance. And so you may remember some of the talk about characters like Mace Windu, who is a little bit darker than some of the other Jedi, and was this a problem? Or when Luke got angry in Return of the Jedi, or Luke gets angry at a couple of points. Was this a problem? Was this immaturity or weakness, or a dangerous flirting with the dark side? Or was it just like a guy who's in balance and using both the light and the dark the way kind of the modern interpretation is? So, one, I think there is a change, right? So I think Disney does have a different interpretation. It's a more gray interpretation than Lucas's.
Well,
and
okay.
I prefer the Lucas interpretation.
Okay.
But not to the point that I would ever let it get in the way of enjoying how the movies get portrayed now. I'm always happy with the idea that just because someone on screen tells me something, that doesn't make it so. So, just because characters, whether it's Yoda or Obi-Wan or whoever it is, might have said some stuff about light side and dark side and what it all means, that doesn't mean that they were right. I mean, I may prefer that they were right or not. And then I have characters now who are like, no, it's more of a balance, it's more of a gray. You kind of have to have harmony between the light and the dark. And you go, okay, well, that's your position. That's nice.
Uh-huh.
I don't think either of them have to be true. I think we could have other movies later which take a different point of view, and it's not like this stuff is written in stone. So you should never let a change in what the Force seems to be meaning be something that gets in your way. But I do hear people complaining about the kind of the loss of the Manichaean structure. And it's nice to invest in that powerful heroism that George Lucas kind of set out in the first trilogy.
Well, it's interesting because in this one we hear, when they're doing that first, the first lesson, right? And he said, well, yes, it's in that first lesson, but there's something else I wanted to hit on first, which is that Luke actually says that after Vader was gone, there was balance for a while. Mm-hmm. So by him just being the good Jedi, the balance still existed. So I don't know that they necessarily need to go gray. You know what I mean? I don't think that that's necessary. I don't think it feels that that's what they're doing, because then in that first lesson when you got Rey on, she's like feeling everything. She's feeling the balance between, the light and the dark. I guess the light and the dark, the violence and the peace and the, and everything. So I feel like it's still leaning towards that the Jedi are good, and I think that I don't. And just because of the way Disney is anyway, with their villains and their princesses and all of that stuff, I don't think that they necessarily want to take away the idea that the Jedi are good, or that the idea of the Force is grayer that mixes both. Because I don't know, it just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem very Disney to me, and second of all, like you, I think that changes what Lucas wanted the Force to be in the first place. Just a thought. So how do you feel? So I don't mind changing subjects. So I don't mind that they've added new Force stuff. I feel like they've always added new Force stuff. One of my regulars at the bar smartly pointed out that the only real use of the Force that we see in Episode 4, right, A New Hope, is these aren't the droids you're looking for. We see him use the lightsaber, and then we see him talking as a Force ghosty. Right. And that's pretty much it. So then, the beginning of Empire, what's the first thing that Luke does but pull the lightsaber to his hand? So now we're already
Right.
So from the second movie, we're already saying, hey, there's going to be a lot of stuff that the Force can do. We're not going to tell you all what it is right now. Then you go back to the prequels, and they're all jumping around. There's lots of stuff. There's lots of different stuff. There's, the dreams that they're having, the Force visions, which I guess Luke was also having. But, so there's all these different not interpretations, but there's all these different uses of the Force. So coming then into this movie, and you have people who are Force timing, which, by the way, this has been pointed out a lot, but Jamie pointed it out to me the second time we saw it, was that Kylo actually says to Rey the first time they're Force timing is like, you can't be doing this. The effort would kill you. Which sets up then the end of the movie when Luke Skywalker is projecting himself across the galaxy and, it ultimately kills him. So that's amazing. So the new ideas of what the Force can or cannot do does not bother me at all. I totally dig it, and I loved what they did in this movie with that stuff.
So I think gaming has always introduced a lot of really good ideas to franchises. I think getting too committed to one game's interpretation can be a problem. I know, like the guys who do, I think it's Trek Yards. One of them kind of grew up with FASA and Starfleet Battles, and so he has problems with the fact that was never really canon, and they've gone in different directions with stuff.
But then you got just the opposite problem, because on the Star Wars end, you have the West End games that laid out so much stuff, and then forever that was canon, all of that West End game stuff, and some of it still is. So
a lot of that stuff so when you're building characters, and you can go, well, I've got like all these powers, Force powers I could choose, but I've only got so many character points to apply.
Or slots.
Or I've only gotten so many experience, I can't buy them all. I can't use them all. So I'm going to select, this and that. And so I've got like this small range of powers that I'm good at. Maybe there's a broader range of powers that I'm capable of using. And you over there who built a Jedi just like me, you have a whole different set of powers.
Yeah.
And so ultimately there are lots of powers out there that are the Force. But unless we see one Jedi using all of them, there's no reason, to think that the old rules still don't apply. We're just meeting new Jedi, and new Jedi mean new powers.
Yep, exactly.
I do think you have a problem, and here I'll go to James Bond.
Okay.
So James Bond had this problem in terms of the gadgets. Right? Adding new gadgets constantly, at some point, did become a distraction. It became not just, oh, look, spies have gadgets, but the movie seems to be about the gadgets.
Yeah.
And so at some point after Goldfinger, and I'm not sure exactly when, because it probably isn't just one movie. It wasn't just Thunderball, or it wasn't just Diamonds Are Forever, it wasn't, just Live and Let Die, Moonraker. It's at some point in the mid-'70s, when you're, let's say, 3 or 4 movies in, you're like, especially when the plots get thin. Some of those, let's say Moonraker, The Spy Who Loved Me, especially, the one with Duran Duran doing the theme song.
View to a Kill.
Yeah, View to a Kill. I think they have a story problem. The stories get a little bit weak. And in that sense, the gadgets become a crutch.
Yep.
And so I think there is an argument to be made about you got to be careful when you're adding the new stuff. On the other hand, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, if you're telling a good story, whatever the story needs the Force to be, that's what the Force is going to be.
Yep. Well, I was just reading, or not reading, I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about the talking about Revenge of the Sith. And the guy who... So it's Star Wars Minute. That was the name of the podcast. It's the one where they, listen to, or they watch 1 minute of Star Wars and then they talk for 30 minutes about that 1 minute. So they're doing Revenge of the Sith now, and the guy that they had on was a screenwriter for, and he goes, the biggest problems that they have in these movies, prequels, is that George Lucas would come up with a character or a ship or an idea, and then the whole part of the movie is built around that one idea. And he goes, and that's not how you write a screenplay. He goes, I was actually hired to write a screenplay. We had a great script. And then one day the director came in and had this idea. And he goes, this is a director I can't name, but that you would know. Like, and he came in with this great idea for a shot he wanted that had nothing to do with the rest of the script. So we literally had to rewrite part of the third act because we needed to put this shot in. And he goes, and that's what makes a bad movie. So there's so many times you can go into a movie and being like, oh, the director really wanted to do this or wanted this, blah, blah, blah. So the best instance of this is General Grievous. You know, like they created, they were drawing out, you know, what could this character look like and what could this character look like and blah, blah, blah. They didn't have, there wasn't a General Grievous yet, but Lucas picked up the drawing, looked at it and said, oh, I want to make this a character in the next movie. And so he adds General Grievous. Did you need General Grievous in that movie? Probably not. There was a lot of other story to be told. That's always my problem with the prequels is I always feel like, well, you wasted a lot of time telling this part of the story that really didn't matter. You know what I mean? My biggest go-to, of course, is the 30 minutes you spend on that stupid pod race, right? Why couldn't it have been one lap? You know what I mean? Why couldn't it have been, you know, this to that? You know, it could have been like a 5-minute thing, and then we would have been over with and gotten on and talked about something maybe more interesting, whatever that was. So I feel that that's the same thing that probably happened with a lot of those gadget things is like, well, what's the new gadget this time? Okay, let's build up where we get to a point where suddenly he needs a new gadget as opposed to let's write the script and then see where we can put in the gadget.
Well, I think at a certain point, you know, in the beginning, let's say the first 2 movies, by which I now mean Dr. No and From Russia with Love.
Yes.
In which it was just the idea that spies had gadgets. And so if we're doing a spy story, we're going to have, you know, the camera bow tie or the, you know, the vest microphone or, you know, these kinds of little tricks. And it wasn't so much we got to have gadgets as it was, well, spies have gadgets. And he's a spy, so he has gadgets. And then at some point we're like, okay, now we built a car that had machine guns and ejector seats and bulletproof panels. So how do we top that? Well, we're going to have to do something really extraordinary. Instead of just being like, you know, spies have gadgets. So let's just go back to spies have gadgets. And if we come up with some good ones, or if the story demands that he has a good one, then he has a good one. And if the story doesn't need it, then, you know, aside from the fact that he'll have, you know, a camera in a weird place, like a buttonhole or something, then we don't have it. So, like, I don't feel like whether we're talking about Discovery and the Vulcan, you know, mental powers, or whether we're talking about the Force, or whether we're talking about how the Klingons were altered, or, you know, any of this stuff, that any of that stuff was done because, well, we got to top it. We got to be new just for the sake of being new, and it's got to top what we've done before. I felt like, you know, this stuff typically is introduced because you want either to say something about the character or you want to advance the character story. Because you want to advance the character story in a way that, you know, feels like it's cool. You know, Luke should do cool things. Mm-hmm.
They had to do it this way because otherwise, like, you saw what happened. I mean, that's exactly what Rey would have done is she would have pulled a gun on him and then tried to kill him. You know what I mean? So it's like you had to have some way for these two to communicate where they weren't actually seeing each other.
Right.
And neither one of them are just going to, like, hollow net up the other one and be like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah. But I think the thing that struck me most, that made that necessary, as opposed to just, why are they doing this, was there's this question. Is Rey going to turn to the dark side? Is, Kylo salvageable? Is there enough good in him to redeem him? Mm-hmm. And so as long as that was in play, having them interact, you're wondering, who's turning who here? They both seem to be trying to turn one another.
Yeah.
And that's good story, right? Because that's what this stuff is about.
Yeah. That was, I mean, obviously that was my favorite part of the story, was where they took those characters was unexpected and amazing. I really loved the whole thing because, so you set up that whole throne room scene, right? Up to, like, there's a scene on the elevator just like in Return of the Jedi, right? Just like between him and Vader. Between Luke and Vader. So you set up that thing, and then you get him on there, and then he kills Snoke in, like, the most brilliant way ever. And then, you know, he They start fighting together against the Praetorian guards. So you feel like, okay, this is it. Even Rey is like, okay, hey, call off the bombing of the guys. And then when he doesn't, and again, your whole expectations now again subverted by what he's doing, you're like, oh, this isn't gonna go that way. Which maybe too, I did hear, I sort of felt that way too. Is that I feel like in a way this was the third movie of the trilogy. So it'll be really interesting now to see what the third movie of the trilogy will be, because you're like, well, we took care of Snoke, and again, we've cleared the board. So all we have is the Resistance and the. Not that there's not an adventure now for story, an adventure for Poe and Finn and everybody.
I think it's wide open.
Yeah, exactly. They could they can do anything. It's going to be great. I love it.
And one of the great disappointments, of course, is that Carrie Fisher died.
Yes.
And so they couldn't make, movie 3 about Carrie Fisher the way they had planned. Yeah. And while that will be a disappointment, her untimely death also means that, really, as you've said, the boards are cleared. Snoke is gone. Yep. Luke is gone. Han is gone. Leia's gone. And so this is going to be a whole new story about future people, unburdened by the past in a way that Kylo, was all about.
Yep. Well, it's funny, man.
So, yeah. Go ahead. Well, yeah, Luke was, kind of being a stick in the mud, right? Oh, I'm not going to go on the adventure. I'm not going to do the thing. And part of his... So, she wants to redeem Kylo, right? You can tell that's what she wants to do. And he's just not into it.
Nope.
And in one sense, you kind of feel like, what's wrong with you, Luke? Go do that thing that you did before where you redeemed the guy.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, he's not fixable. And ultimately, that's how it plays out. Yep. He was not susceptible to being turned by Rey.
Do you think he's irredeemable?
Luke was right.
Go ahead. Luke was right. What?
So, Luke's unwillingness to go... He's like, what are we going to go do? Because if he's already aware that Kylo's not redeemable...
Yeah.
It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can open some doors. I can, baffle some stormtroopers. I can turn off a tractor beam if you need me to.
Yeah.
But how does this get us to the thing? Because the thing, redeeming Kylo, that's not a real thing. We can't do that thing.
So do you think he's...
in a sense,
do you think he's irredeemable?
Well, Luke turns out to be right. Is he irredeemable? He seems to be making all the choices that say no.
It's interesting. I think so. But again, I think that that's purposeful. I think that they're setting him up so it looks like it. Of course, the fans all along have been like, well, he's irredeemable in my eyes because he killed Han Solo. So many people have been saying that.
Right, yeah.
But story-wise, it's... Oh, so taking a real-world look at it, here's the reason I do think he'll be redeemed. And
right.
is because he's the only Skywalker. So if this is the Skywalker saga, so maybe the Skywalker saga ends with the last Skywalker dying. Possible. I feel like
tragedy.
Yeah, I guess. I just don't feel like that's the way. Again, they're gonna go with it. It just doesn't seem like Disney's like ready to do that. So it'll be interesting to see if if they decide to get rid of him somehow. And even if he is redeemed, then what? You know what I mean? Like, he still was the leader of the... He was, part of the Starkiller base. He was... there was that Infinities... There was a Star Wars Infinities comic that was done where, what happens if Luke would have done this, this, and this, which would have eventually saved Vader. But then you're left with the question of, but then he's still Darth Vader. Like, he still killed all those people. Like, the galaxy isn't just going to be like, oh, okay... Your Force religion must be saying it's fine, so we're going to say it's fine. Like, that's not happening, you know what I mean? So, because I think at that point anybody comes after him, and then he's like, oh, old Anakin again, just killing people, because you're not going to take me alive, copper. But, so I guess we'll see what happens. I'm going to throw Jamie's theory just so that it's out in the universe and people know it. Jamie's theory is that Rey is going to die trying to save, not like literally, like metaphorically, but like physically save Kylo, and then that's what makes him turn back.
That's Jamie's theory, which I like. I even thought about like getting her on the podcast because she's been thinking some awesome stuff lately, and I'm like, oh, I like that idea. That's amazing.
I do feel like some of the best stuff is when you think about this good content, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so thinking about Star Trek, which is what this podcast is usually about.
Yep.
And thinking about Star Wars, which is what we're doing today, or thinking about stuff that's worth thinking about. Shakespeare, we've mentioned that.
Yep.
Just thinking about good literature, whether it's performed or whether it's written, that's worth doing. That's interesting. That's engaging. So, I think the trick is not to become so committed to your own view of things that when it turns out to be something different, you're unhappy. Because I have difficulty figuring out why people are so unhappy without that kind of commitment.
In terms of the Force Ghosts that we were just discussing, what'd you think of the bringing back Yoda in this one?
So I thought it was good. But a part of it was you know, Luke had two teachers, Obi-Wan and Yoda. So as Luke struggles with ending the Jedi, with whatever that means, you know, burning down the temple, destroying the books, you know, whatever, it kind of makes sense that at some point one of them shows up to offer some advice. Given that Alec Guinness is not available, that Ewan McGregor showing up probably just would have made Luke go, and who are you again? You know, because he'd never seen young Obi-Wan. Yoda's the obvious choice.
Exactly. So I agree. I think Yoda is the best choice for all those reasons. Rian Johnson himself even said, you know, I think that he just didn't have Luke just didn't have a relationship with this Obi-Wan, with Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan. So
right.
that would be weird, which is also very true. And I think that Yoda is the perfect person to sort of tell him, like, hey, you know, like, remember those things that I told you you're still not doing them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I thought it was great. I did see somebody online say, and I thought that this was brilliant, was that the idea of bringing in Anakin to talk about, like, yeah, I made mistakes too. Like, hope everybody can learn from them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But here's my thought: is like, let's save that for the next movie. Let's have Anakin come back to Kylo and be like, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean? You're like, think of the mistakes I made. Think of what I did. Think of all it cost me, my children, my wife, you know, all of that, all gone because of these mistakes that I made. I think I can only hope they'll do that, though I suspect that they won't. But that would be amazing if they did it.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else? Oh, how about that reveal of Rey's parents? What's your stance on that? Again, I'm just hitting all the things that people are complaining about. So, Rey's parents, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's fine because I don't have any... It was fun to think about.
Yeah.
But you can't get committed to what you think about. You know,
Right.
You have to be, one, willing to be surprised by the story. The story cannot be surprise-free.
Right.
It's got to be willing to take you in a direction you did not expect it to go. It's got to be able to pull reversals on you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's got to be willing to make you think that you're just trying to figure out what the Genesis Project is all about. Then oh my goodness, it's Khan!
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I liked it too. I like that, you know, I'd heard somebody say, I don't know who it was, but I'd heard or read somewhere like 2 weeks before the movie came out, they were like, Rey probably knows who her parents are. Like, she was 8 in that, you know, in that little thing where the ship's flying away. Like, she would recognize her parents. She would know who they are. She would know their names. So the fact that she didn't immediately recognize Luke or immediately like, you know, see Han and Leia and be like, holy cow, you're my parents. Like, that instantly tells you that we don't know or she hasn't ran into whoever her parents are yet.
Right.
So and so once that got implanted in my head, like 2 weeks before the movie came out, I was already ready for this may not go the way you think, to quote, Luke, that they could totally, again, subvert it in some way that's going to be, oh my gosh. And so what I've loved is people saying that, like, their favorite part of Rey's parents being nobody is that the Force isn't about bloodlines again. You know what I mean? It's not about midichlorians or any of this stuff. It's literally like the Force, it's going back to the Force could be anybody, right? Like, just like we felt after the original trilogy of like, I should be able to use the Force and get this remote in my hand,
Yeah.
It's like, so I think that's cool the way it's kind of opened up the idea of like, and then we see the little boy at the end, right? Who's using the broom or who grabs the broom with the Force. It's like, those are just these like perfect little moments of, okay, we're going to open up the Force again so that it can be anybody and not just these set group of people. I was kind of making notes as we went along.
How much do you think that this is I know in American culture there is a strong phenomenon for the pendulum to swing the other way, for people to turn against whoever is on top, to dislike the obvious favorite. So to what extent is this kind of a blowback phenomenon, or that this movie's supposed to be so good, I feel like I need to pile onto it and attack it just because no movie can be that good.
The trolls of the world.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent I think there's trolls, but I think there's whether it's, to put it in a nicer phrase, especially I think in American culture, there is a support for the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And support for the underdog naturally comes with a kind of wanting to tear down who was ever on top. And I think we do have a lot of tearing down. The way a celebrity like a Britney Spears can get built up really quickly and then torn down really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what this word is. It's not flashback. It's not blowback. But it's got back in it.
Baby's got back?
But we do have that kind of... We like to tear down things.
Right.
We like to... And so how much do you think that Star Wars is just plagued by the fact that it is a successful franchise, and so it's just going to have a lot of haters?
It's... Yeah, I mean, it's so possible. It's funny because I saw an article in a reputable paper that was basically like, oh, looks like the next... the Last Jedi is going to bomb, and, blah, 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 despite the fact that it already made $600 million. And I was like, how's that a bomb again?
Yeah.
And then just this past week, Forbes put out an article that was like, can we just stop saying that The Last Jedi is going to be a bomb? Because it's not. It's already made $800 million, or it's already made, like, domestically, it's already made like $517, million. Worldwide, it's already crossed the billion mark. Like, this is in no way a bomb.
Right.
So... Yeah, I mean, there probably is some of that, but it's weird for me because the two biggest places I've been seeing it are in these two Star Wars face groups that I belong to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Facebook groups, and so it's weird when you've got people who are like, "No, I really love Star Wars," and we can talk about it for hours on Facebook, and then go see a Star Wars movie and be like, "Well, that movie just sucked." You know what I mean? That's the more interesting people in my mind.
So here's a specific example of this phenomenon, the hipster, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I like that band, but only their early work.
Yes, exactly.
At some point they became, and there's a long list, too commercial, they sold out to a major label, they changed their style in this particular way, they changed their lead singer, something changed, and suddenly now... we're just going to trash on that thing.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, well, a band can't produce the same sound forever, or at least not be successful. And, it's certainly reasonable to like some albums more than others. But there's this phenomenon, there's this thing where people are like, well, I like the early work.
Well, I hear that about Star Wars all the time. They're like, I love the original trilogy, but I don't like anything else. And you're like, well, okay, then are you really a Star Wars fan, or are you just like an original trilogy fan? That's what like there's a difference. Somebody called it out one time and was like, okay, so you like half the movies I don't think that makes you a fan. You know what I mean? You only like half of a thing.
Yeah. But we see that, all over the place. They're... I like them under these limited conditions, and you're like, ultimately, those conditions are pretty limited.
Yeah, exactly.
I only like this team when this one guy was the quarterback. Their team's been around for 70 years. Most of that time, not had that quarterback.
Yep,
so
exactly.
Maybe you really don't like that team. Maybe you like that quarterback.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's perfectly reasonable for there to be lots of people who have an occasional appreciation for Star Wars. To not actually be Star Wars fans. To be, I like certain stuff, and this movie hit that thing, and these other movies didn't, and so I kind of like these movies, and I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
When, I think it was when they were making Star Trek 6, and whether it was the director, the producer, someone was saying, you want to make a movie that is capable of winning over, of appealing to a broad audience, not just the fans. I mean, obviously, I think, especially looking at the Marvel, phenomenon that they've done, certainly you want to win over the fans. You don't want your appeal to be so broad that the fans are kind of like, I don't even recognize this material.
Yeah, I don't even know what this is.
Yeah. But you also don't want to be like, you just keep going over the exact same material and the characters don't change.
Yeah, exactly. It's boring.
Yeah. In movies especially, because movies are supposed to be archy, right? I mean, especially movies made today. So, to talk about some of the stuff we're talking about on a more regular basis, the early original series and its kind of lack of archiness, its strong episodic character, is something that works, I think, well in TV, and it doesn't work in movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so even just taking those characters into the movies meant we were going to have arcs. And of course, if you are a movie franchise, whether it's Star Wars or even James Bond, I think if you like look at the Daniel Craig, they've been really good, and part of it's been they've been archy.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons Sean Connery got bored of it was they weren't archy. His character wasn't doing anything interesting.
Yeah.
He was just doing the same thing over and over again. And when your actor gets tired of being James Bond, you've got a problem.
Right, exactly. One last thought I had was, what about Hux?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's interesting because I've heard people say that, because I feel like he was the butt of a lot of jokes. Like, and he has been in both movies, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, but also, I mean, in the first one, you could tell he had that thing going on with Kylo. And then in this one, it took Jamie like 3 times to see this movie before she saw this moment. I saw it the first time. Is when Kylo's lying on the ground and Hux is standing over him. He reaches for his gun, like really like subtly. And then as soon as Kylo wakes up, he puts his like coat back and he's like,
yeah,
I wasn't going to do anything. I wasn't going to kill you. So it's interesting because then the question becomes, what happens to Hux? Like, so especially in this one, like at the end when he's like repeating what Kylo says just so he can feel like he has some sort of like he's gonna try and like, supplant Kylo, and I'm like, I don't think Hux is that strong a character to do that. Like I just feel like the way they've been treating him, it doesn't work. What do you think?
Yeah. So compared to our, let's say, the more imperial figures, right? Those guys were, and part of it is the mental landscape in which Lucas was operating were World War II movies, right?
Yeah.
So these guys are basically Nazi generals.
Exactly.
And the Nazi generals were all older guys.
Yep.
They were guys who'd worked themselves up through the German army. They had all had World War I experience. These were not guys like Hux.
Right.
And I do feel that one of the things that's going on with the First Order is that they were not necessarily, drawing on this high quality tradition of guys who came up and had proved themselves over and over again.
Right.
He was available. He was available to do the thing. And so, yeah, he may not be Grand Mark Toffin,
Yeah.
who is, a serious guy,
Yeah.
And we do see these. One of the features of Imperial officers is that they're cunning, they're sneaky, they're tricksy, they're willing to stab a guy in the back, and I think Hux has all that.
Uh-huh.
It's just that Hux feels like he's 28 rather than, say, 58.
Yeah. Well, I think that's sort of purposeful, too. And it's funny because I was reading through the visual guide the other night. And remember the guy who's, like, leading up the dreadnoughts right at the beginning of the movie? The older guy, His name's Kennedy. And, he's a former Imperial officer from back in the day. And so, but here he is dealing with all these, like, younger idiots,
Yeah.
We should have had why weren't the TIE fighters out 5 minutes ago? Like him just like dealing with like the incompetency of all of these like younger kids who, the First Order was able to get their hands on. I mean, some of the backstory on the First Order is that they've been like grooming these kids, over the last like 20 years.
Yeah.
They've just been, yanking them out of their like houses and stuff to groom them to become, these stormtroopers or officers or however they're testing out. So anyway, interesting, and we'll see what happens with Hux in the next one. It just again seems hard for me to think that he. I mean, I guess he's next in line technically, right? He was even tested in this movie that Kylo was just like taking over, but I don't know. He's an interesting character too. He's really like come high on my list of characters. I want to see what happens in the next movie too.
Mm-hmm.
So. All right. Well, I think my notes are done. You got anything else you want to talk about? Anything we haven't hit?
I think we pretty much hit all the highlights.
I mean, not that I couldn't talk about this movie for another hour, but maybe we'll save it for when the DVD comes out again or something. The night we had finished recording this, my brother sent me a addendum. Something he wanted to add. One last thought. So this is Ken's one last thought.
I do have one more thought. And that is, in the way that, say, a stalkery boyfriend or girlfriend can be too obsessive and cling too tightly to the thing they love a little too much, it's possible that some of this hate is the result of finding out that object of your affection doesn't remain the thing that you want it to be. You want to freeze it in amber and never let it go. And it has a life of its own. It's becoming different things and moving on and experimenting with different approaches to characters or the Force or what happens next or plot lines.
I feel like that left us dangling somehow. But that's my brother for you. All right, well, that's it. That wraps up another episode. Folks, we will be back next week with Discovery. Believe it or not, Discovery is coming back. We're very excited. We can't wait for it. I might even have to do a rewatch this week just to catch up and remember what it was that even happened last, because it feels like it's been... I know it's only been like 6 or 8 weeks, but it feels like forever ago to me. This whole month is just... It's been a long month. Let me just put it that way. All right, well, on that note... My name's Matt. I'm saying goodbye. And as always in Houston, say goodbye, Ken.
Live long and prosper.
That's right. And we'll see you all next week for some Discovery.